Okay, hi everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with this afternoon's session. My name is Dan. I'll be your room host for the session this afternoon, Criminal Justice Reform. I do want to give a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, ITC. And as a reminder to all of you listening in, questions and comments can be left in the Whova app, just on the right side of the screen in the chat section. I'll go ahead and pass those over to our moderator when those come in. Speaking of our moderator, his name is Jeff Stein, and I'll hand it over to him right now.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am with News Talk 1540, KXEL, Iowa's 50,000 watt clear channel radio station based in Cedar Rapids and Waterloo. And it's my privilege again to be a moderator for this year's session, although it looks very much different than it did last year. And we thank everyone for participating. This session, as you know, if you are signed up for it and click the right link, is about criminal justice reform. And we're going to have a broad conversation on that topic for the next hour with Dr. Beth Skinner of the Iowa Department of Corrections, Betty Andrews with the NAACP, and Daniel Zeno of the ACLU of Iowa. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you for taking the time. I want to start with just some basic conversation about the fundamentals of where we are so that we're all talking about the same thing and we all are sort of understanding where each other is coming from. And so I'm going to hit a couple of very basic topics and direct them toward each of the panelists, and then we'll circle back and drill down a little more as this goes along. So Dr. Skinner, I'll start with you and give me what you think from where you sit literally are the greatest issues on the topic, quote, criminal justice reform. What are the things that we should be talking about when this topic is mentioned?
Sure. You know, and I had the great opportunity of being a part of the focus committee, and we've talked a lot about these subjects and made some great recommendations. I think first and foremost, the first thing that I think really needs to happen when you're talking about criminal justice reform is that you have support at the highest level of the state, which is our governor and lieutenant governor, who's very supportive of criminal justice reform. Really important component of that. The second is you have to have the right stakeholders together. And so part of the focus committee was great is that we had different stakeholders at the table to talk about criminal justice reform, because what we know is that we can't rely on one agency to make the reform. It has to be all the agencies working on criminal justice reform, whether it be legislators, law enforcement, the courts, corrections, Board of Parole, NAACP, ACLU, other state agencies. And so it really has to be a holistic approach to criminal justice reform. The areas that we really focused on for the purpose of, for the focus committee is that we really need to bolster and have more robust treatment services to those that are incarcerated. If we want to reduce risk, we have to give the treatment to those underlying behaviors that cause people to engage and get caught into the criminal justice system. We also know we want to expand education for those that are incarcerated and post-secondary education. These are pathways to desistance that build human and social capital. We want to realign staff and resources to more evidence-based programs and strategies. We had a great, before COVID hit, we had this great opportunity with the governor and Director Townsend. We did roundtables with Iowa Workforce Development, talked about the benefits of hiring people that have criminal backgrounds and how what actually it provides a lot of benefit, not only to the individual, but to the community and public safety. We also talked about getting driver's license, making sure people had state driver's license when they left so they could be able to get housing, get jobs, get benefits. We have now a partnership with the Department of Transportation where we have a mobility advisor in one of our prisons that has issued at least 55 state IDs to date. So again, looking at the various barriers and challenges for those individuals and helping them get through those barriers or reducing those barriers is part of the reform as well.
And a reminder for those who are not as well-versed on the topic, the Focus Committee, FOCUS stands for Fueling Ongoing Collaboration and Uncovering Solutions. Focus Committee on Criminal Justice Reform was rolled out very late last year, right, and the work continuing this year. Given that period of time, Ms. Andrews, first of all, based upon what Dr. Skinner said, are these the things we should be talking about? And how has the conversation evolved or changed since the committee was actually formed?
So thank you so much, first of all, for having me, Jeff. I'm happy to be. I think this is my third or fourth year running at the Iowa Ideas Conference. So I'm pleased to be here and pleased that you continue to invite me back, because this is a hugely important subject for our state. And so last year, when which was at the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities, which is a summit that the NAACP is the leading sponsor, and I produce for the state of Iowa. The governor announced the Focus Reform, Criminal Justice Reform Committee. And it was at the request of the NAACP and our advocacy work. And so we were really pleased that the governor did take this on. And I echo the sentiments from Director Skinner in terms of this takes the work of all of us, and particularly the highest officials in the land. And as the state area president of the NAACP, I have always had this philosophy to go straight to the top and make sure that you are targeting the people that, and when I say targeting, I don't mean that negatively, but that you are reaching out to the people that can actually make a difference. And so we were pleased to have this committee appointed. It is a different rendition, but a rendition of a committee that we had previously as well. And so when with the goals of creating an unbiased criminal justice system, that was huge for us. The other piece was, of course, reentry. So we think that the Focus Committee has a lot of the aspects that are needed when it comes to criminal justice reform and addressing those. In particular, we at the NAACP strive to address the disparities within the criminal justice system. Our state has a very high ranking when it comes to the number of incarcerated African Americans in the criminal justice system and those that are on supervision, to the point where at one point we were #1 in the nation for this disparity, locking up African Americans for every one white person per capita. There were almost 18 African Americans per capita. So that was a huge issue for us. That's exponential difference. And being, again, #1 in the nation was of concern to us. So for the NAACP, the issue that we primarily have tackled, and when we tackle this issue, it benefits all, has been what's going on within our system when it comes to this disparity. And when I say system, I often remind people that it's actually systems with an S, in that there is, you're dealing with law enforcement, you're dealing with the prosecutors, whether or not they charge and how they prosecute the case, the level at which they charge, you're dealing with the judge, and you're dealing with the sentencing, mandatory sentencing, whether or not one piece is just the difference in how some things are sentenced. So powder cocaine versus crack cocaine, and then also in terms of what's happening in the prisons and how people are released and all of those things. So we're addressing this on multiple levels. So, and again, when you address the diversity piece, naturally the general piece improves. So those are areas in which we believe very strongly our state needs to continue to work on to improve our criminal justice system. And it's important because this affects people's lives. Obviously, even going forward, thinking about the issues of re-entering society. So one of the big victories that we recently had, I know the NAACP, ACLU, one of our partners on this, was the signing of Executive Order 7, which allowed probably 50,000 people the opportunity to vote after being incarcerated. So these are issues that we still are making now, we're making sure that people are registered and have that opportunity, and also are not fearful of the system. So there are a number of issues. One place that we are addressing those issues, let me just do a shameless plug, is at the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities this year. So we will be talking there about these issues, criminal justice reform, on October the 29th at our virtual conference, iowajusticesummit.org. And so we'll leave it there. Lots more to talk about on the subject.
Just 2 weeks from today.
That's 2 weeks.
No shameless plug is rejected in the session. I would say my background is as an attorney, in addition to what I do here. And I'd almost say, when you're talking about systems, just add the general public, because who makes up the jury? And again, as someone who did criminal defense work,
jury pools is a big topic.
I just took it off. But it is something to keep in mind, because we talk about systems and we talk about the people who work every day in the systems, which makes sense, because when we work in the system, we know this person, we know these people. But the general person who comes in for jury service, that's a whole distinct element of the whole thing. Mr. Zeno, I want to get your take on these, the big issues. What is it that we should be talking about? Either amplify what's been said or add to the list, please.
Yeah, I think I second everything Dr. Skinner and Ms. Andrews said. I think an additional conversation that we need to continue to have is about mass incarceration, about the response to criminal.
Define that term, just so that we're all using the same terminology the same way. Define that, please.
Yeah, so when I say mass incarceration, I mean using the criminal legal system as the primary and almost exclusive response to all kinds of social ills. And so that big question of, the United States is the country that incarcerates more people than any other country in the world, right? And if that worked, you would think the United States would be the safest country in the world, and the country with the lowest crime rate. And yet that's not true. And so beginning to think about, how do we begin to address the variety of issues that right now are addressed through the criminal legal system? Can they be addressed in other ways? And that can lead into all kinds of directions, alternatives to incarceration for juveniles, for adults, thinking through, should the Iowa legislature redefine some things as not felonies, as not a criminal act at all? Should there be other responses other than law enforcement? And so I think just thinking broadly about, how do we reimagine a system that doesn't say the response is call the police and then go to jail?
And I have often advocated that we should just take the Code of Iowa, which, I don't know, 6 volumes now, I can't even tell you how many, but there's a lot of laws that are in there, and we should just pledge to not enact any new laws until we've gone through each volume and just kind of comb through it. Take out the references to muskets or whatever it is that we just, because there's this sense that if there's a societal issue, we just pass a law and then everything's fine. Well, passing the law is the part that makes lay people feel something's been done. But there are unintended consequences of that. Again, there may be a conflict with a different portion of the code, et cetera. Let me stay with you, Mr. Zeno, and kind of broaden this out. So we've been talking about some of the issues to frame the conversation. What are some of the challenges to actually getting to address them and lead to meaningful change from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Betty hit on it a little bit. I think part of the challenge is there are multiple systems. Mm-hmm. There are multiple actors who have done things the way they've done things for a long time, right? And then I think there's also a sense with kind of the general public of, we want to be safe. We want to be in healthy communities, right? And for a long time, the response, the sort of how you get there is use the criminal legal system. And so I think one of the challenges is to really take this conversation about mass incarceration, about alternatives, take it from not only just being in the legislature with policymakers, but with the everyday public. What does it look like in your individual community to have a safe, healthy community? And I think when we begin to do that, it's sort of thinking of ways of how to empower people, how to help people understand the county attorney in your county, the person who makes the charging decision, is an elected official. You have the power to vote for whoever you'd like, to hold them accountable, to demand transparency, right? And so I think figuring out how to get the conversation out of only just the legislative kind of policy arena and into communities, into kind of arenas of the public, the general public, so that we can start beginning to come up with better and new and more effective ideas.
Can I add something to that? Do you mind?
Actually, I was going to go to you next, so go ahead.
Great.
Go right ahead.
And we all know here that, the racial disparity issue has not, and issues around equity didn't happen overnight. This is something that's been happening for a long time. And so there's a lot of undoing, if you will. And I think a really important piece of that, and as Daniel mentioned too, is that we also have to look at, who are the key players in this? Who can come to the table to help address it? Because we know it's just not going to be one single agency. It's going to be across multiple agencies. And it's going to take the community, to hold agencies accountable. I think what I really think is important too is that every agency has to do their part, right? And one thing when I think about racial disparities and how each agency may handle it, whether it be the courts or the legislators or corrections, it might not all be the same approach to address the issue. Some of us have created our own barriers or these disparities. And so it's our responsibility to be able to address those. I also think that we need to have data readily available and be able to make decisions based on the data. I think the data is really key here. Sorry, I hit my keyboard there. Data is essential. It tells us where we're at. We can set goals. We can see where our hotspots are, the areas that we need to address. But I think there has to be a lot of transparency. And I think that each of us, all the agencies, need to hold each other accountable because it's not going to be, there's not a silver bullet for this.
And I was going to ask you, Dr. Skinner, of when we talk about changing the systems, right? Mm-hmm. There are a number of different components or aspects that can be sort of tweaked or modified or changed. The one, though, that is truly an institution, and I know I didn't mean the pun, but it's the only word I could think of, is the correction system. That's the hardest to change, is it not?
Well, in the correction system, like I said, it's been, disparities have been around for some time. And I will tell you as a director of Iowa Department of Corrections that I am fully committed to address racial disparities and inequities in our system. It's one of my key target priorities here in the next 5 years. And Betty knows that very well, as Betty and I talked about that. We develop a racial disparity policy that comes out on a yearly basis on certain metrics to see, make sure that we're looking across classification, risk assessment, education, apprenticeship programs, discipline, violations. We're looking all across race. And if we see disparities, we are asking the district directors in our prisons, our wardens, to look under the hood and see what's going on. Are we creating these disparities? We want to be a part of the solution. It's a big system. Iowa's, not a huge system compared to others, but, we have to do, there's pieces to the puzzle. It's racial disparity report's not going to fix the disparities in our system. We know we have to do other things such as train our staff on, diversity trains. We're training all of our staff on implicit bias. We have a dashboard that looks at a ton of metrics across race. We have special research projects that look at conditions of supervision, risk assessment, that also look at the nexus of race. So we know there's lots of pieces to the puzzle in order to really address the issues of racial disparity. Again, it's not a silver bullet. It's a combination of various things we have to look at in order really to make a difference. And again, we have to rely on our partners. We have to rely on ACLU. We have to rely on the NAACP to help us with this. And again, it's not a silver bullet. There's a multitude of things we need to do to address disparities. But I will tell you that we are completely committed to this. and moving forward. And like I said, Betty and I, and I know Daniel knows me pretty well now too, is that the corrections as a big system is very committed to reducing these disparities.
So Ms. Andrews, you said something a moment ago that I think is a good way to jump off of what Dr. Skinner said, where we're talking a lot about racial disparities, et cetera. And I think you made the comment that if we address that concept, then the other issues then come from it. Is that why there has been such focus of late on the racial disparities that exist? Because if you can find some answers there, they will have broad-reaching ramifications, as opposed to some of the other things that I think Mr. Zeno mentioned, such as reclassifying crimes, et cetera. Is that one of the entrees to get to a broader resolution of some issues?
No, Jeff, that's not why. That's not why.
Well, I'm not ignoring the fact that you have human beings, but what I'm saying is,
right.
You have to, I'm not ignoring the fact that you have human beings that you're talking about that may be grievously harmed by a system that is not ultimately fair. So I understand that. But what I'm saying is, as you try to get others to embrace the vision that you have, and I'm just picking up on what you said, because that will then take care of a number of other things as well.
So yes, what I said was that when you fix the issues around racial disparities, it does have the benefit of helping others in the system and helping everyone. So that's the case. But when I think your question was, is that why there's the attention right now? And I do want to just say that in and of itself, these disparities are a major issue.
Sure.
I mean, anytime you're talking about exponentially, that's a problem. And so to say, I mean, we appreciate that it is a benefit, but the disparities have to be addressed in and of themselves. They have to, we have to look at why the data, as Dr. Skinner said, points this way. You mentioned earlier, you asked Daniel about why there are these challenges. And then you also mentioned kind of going into our books and looking at our laws and things like that. And I agree with that would be awesome to be able to do. But I do want to point out that Wayne Ford, when during his time, introduced a minority impact law, which the legislature now is supposed to use that to look at any legislation being passed through the lens of how it will impact minorities. Well, we have seen time and time again them look and have a negative minority impact statement and pass the legislation anyway. So it really is bigger in a sense than just that. It is, you know, when you ask about what the challenges are, this is America, and this has been our history, and this is the water that we swim in, and this is the water that we live in. And being able to dismantle the systems that have benefited so many for years and years is something that people are uncomfortable with. And that discomfort is where we see the challenges and the pushbacks when it comes to minority or disparate issues. I think one of the biggest civil rights tools that has ever been invented is the cell phone. The fact that we can record video and people can actually see the death of, unfortunately, of George Floyd, which kind of puts a mirror up to America and says that there is no way we can deny this. That is of benefit. But even with situations and circumstances like that, we are still fighting a history of oppression. And the way, as Daniel mentioned earlier, that has been manifested, one of the ways is through mass incarceration. And so yes, the disparities, dealing with the disparities have that benefit, but those issues need to be looked at because America is letting down and really desecrating many of its systems and leaving, its citizens, and leaving many people far behind. And so addressing this and addressing these things, and Dr. Skinner is right. We have had numerous conversations, and I text her in the middle of the night for different things and stuff like that. So it is so good. So on the other side of that, in terms of, you asked about the challenges, but now we're in a place that there are many benefits and that many people have raised their hands to step forward and to take on these challenges, and many people that look like a variety of people, Black, white, Latino, everything, that have stepped up to take on this, and that's good. And that's what an event like the George Floyd death has done, and it's created. At least people are what we call waking up, and in that waking up, we see the protest and we see the action, but we also are looking for the long run to think about how woke takes work, and that now we have to look at bringing the policy in the protest to the policy, and that's how we get the power to make these changes. So.
And what I was driving at earlier inartfully was to say you need broad-based support if you're going to have broad change. And so that's why, if you simply, in my limited view, if you simply brought this as a very narrow topic, you're going to have a lot of people ignore it. And the broader you can show the societal implications beyond individuals who each one are worthy of respect and treatment.
Yeah, but what does that say? What does that say about America, that their sons of many colors, sons and daughters of many colors are crying out, and it takes the backing of kind of the broader community to legitimize and validate what they are saying? And I know that might not be what you were saying, but I'm just saying that's also a challenge. The thing that the cell phone did was bring truth to Black voices and brown voices that had always been speaking. But now with this cell phone or with video and things like that, people cannot deny what happened. So,
well, and to that, to take that to the next logical place, to my point of, you need to have support for change. You need to have incontrovertible evidence sometimes brought up. I'm not suggesting it's right. Yes. I am just simply saying that I dare say that a lot of people are paying attention to the issue over the past, I'll say 6 months, for lack of a better time frame, because of certain videos, et cetera, that have been posted. And so it has changed the discussion and broadened the base of support, and which is why we're having this conversation again. And perhaps more people are listening, as opposed to before, where you've been talking, but the audience might have been smaller.
I agree with that.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask? Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. What I just want to remind people who are participating as spectators, there is the chat function within the Whova app. There is a sentence I never thought I'd utter. There is a chat function in the Whova app. And so please make a comment, suggest a question. It'll pop up on my screen, and then we will pass it along. Where I wanted to take it next, and feel free to follow up with what you wanted to first, Dr. Skinner, is, okay, you all are talking. A lot of people are listening now, more, maybe not a lot, but more are listening now. Are there some areas of agreement that can lead to actual change, maybe have led to actual change? I know where I'm sitting in Waterloo, there have been some policing issue changes made within the past few months, very strong changes, contemporaneous with change in leadership in the department. So are there things that either have been done, or that now that there is a focus on the issue can be done? And then I'll ask Mr. Zeno to take it next, but Dr. Skinner first, please.
Sure. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what
Sure.
Betty was saying. And Betty, I appreciate so much your passion and your advocacy, and just appreciate everything you're doing for the system and for the communities. one thing, historically with corrections, and I'm going to be very honest, is that that's always been a difficult conversation to talk about racial disparities. Historically, is something that wasn't talked a lot about. And that wasn't just an Iowa thing, but I think that was happening nationally. We've gotten to a point now that, it's having people be comfortable with being uncomfortable, having difficult conversations. And we need to have people that understand that they have to have the space to have these discussions, especially when you're talking like a paramilitary type environment, very structured environment. I think part of this is that we have to get people talking. We have to get talking about solutions. We have to talk about, what is the bigger picture of things that we can do, and as our part is corrections, but being a part of our larger criminal justice system and community to help, reduce those disparities. I would say the areas of agreement that I can certainly attest to on behalf of DOC is addressing racial disparities a priority. I have put that into my focused into my strategic plan I'm developing, using data, collecting data so we can make data-driven decisions and know if we're moving in the right direction, identifying policy barriers or barriers that we've created. I think as a group here, we could agree that addressing these racial disparities and inequities in the system is top one priority for us here now and in the near future, because it's going to take some time.
Mr. Zeno, pick up on where we've been in terms of the possibilities of some agreements, or respond to something that you've heard that you haven't had the chance to, please.
Yeah, so I think in terms of agreement, the issue of voting rights for people with felony convictions is something that there is broad bipartisan support for, both in the legislature. The Des Moines Register did polling in 2019 and 2020 that showed Iowans across the political spectrum believe we should end lifetime disenfranchisement. And what I mean by that is, in Iowa, if you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote for life. The governor has issued an executive order, and it's a really good executive order. There's one exception we think that shouldn't be there, but it exists. The continued work we need to do is make that change permanent.
Yes.
Put that into the Iowa Constitution. And what that requires is the legislature taking some action. And so I think there is some agreement. I want to go back to a few things that were talked about earlier. I think it's important to both address racial disparities and also mass incarceration. And here's an example. So pre-COVID-19, Iowa's prison population, about 25% Black people, even though about 4% of Iowa's population are Black people. There has been a reduction in the total number of people in Iowa prisons because, of course, we want to make sure we're protecting people. There are fewer people in Iowa prisons, and yet there are still huge racial disparities, right? And so it's really important to focus on both and not say one or the other, but to say, let's stop incarcerating so many people, and also, as we're doing that, address this issue of racial disparity. I agree, lots more people are paying attention, but it is also true that it has been years where there have been not small, but huge racial disparities in Iowa's criminal legal system. So I'm originally from Louisiana. And so it has been the Iowa nice,
Yes.
right? Having hard, difficult, uncomfortable conversations in a place where, oh no, things are pretty good. And the data showing things are not good, right? I think that is a real challenge of really, and again, I think it's talking both about systems, but also about your community. What do you want in your community? What do you want in your state? And I think that those are some real challenges, but I think there is, some agreement that more and more people are seeing we have a problem, and there are other ways of doing it. Maybe we haven't done it for a while, but there are other ways of doing it. Let's figure out how to do that.
So when we talk, Mr. Zeno, about some of the things that Dr. Skinner mentioned initially, post-release, getting people prepared for release back into the community. Now, obviously, if you don't have the same disparity with regard to sentencing, you don't need that. But this is what I think makes it potentially even more difficult. The fact that you have such a multifaceted problem. You have the disparity, which needs to be addressed over here, and it could be everything from policing to juries to prosecutors who stand for election, whole myriad of things. That needs to be taken care of, but, you know, hello, today we have people who are going to be turned back out into society, and have we given them the tools to succeed? And so do we have enough, I'll say resources, and I mean that in every sense of the word, in terms of education, understanding financial people, we have enough resources to adequately address both of those things that seem to be very pivotal to success?
So, I think yes. I think the answer is yes, we do have enough resources. It's a matter of how do we...
If we want to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we allocate those resources to those things that we say are important, right? So I know I've heard Dr. Skinner say it before. A majority of the people who are incarcerated in Iowa jails, county jails, and prisons will get out one day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the work that we need to be doing is, like you said, on the front end, but also for the people who are in the system. How do we make sure not only when you are released, there's housing, there's employment, you have the right to vote where you feel like you can participate and be a part of the community. And also, how do we make sure the cycle doesn't start again? Mm-hmm. Right? How do we make sure you're released and you get a good job and you get you have a place to live?
Right. And Dan, you're spot on. I mean,
right.
Can I add a little bit to that, Dan? Were you done, Daniel? I don't want to interrupt you. No, I mean, reentry, we know that 90% plus of individuals leaving our prisons are going to be leaving our prisons. Mm-hmm. We release on average about 5,939 people a year. That's just a yearly average. So 90% are coming out. What's really important to think about is that we have to get them treatment. We have to address also the underlying behavior that brought them there to begin with. We have to make sure that reentry, as Daniel was mentioning, is more comprehensive, that they get in, these individuals are getting into good housing, stable housing. They're getting into their substance abuse appointments right away. They're getting their medication. They're not falling through the cracks. That becomes more seamless. And corrections can't do that in a vacuum. Like, we do the handoff to parole and community-based corrections, but we need other state agencies and other nonprofit agencies to help fill the gaps. The resources have to be out there for these individuals. Corrections can certainly use more resources to provide treatment, which is, again, addressing those underlying behaviors. But the community needs the resources too to catch these people. Because what happens is our recidivism rates has been stubbornly high for the last few years. And like Daniel said, these people will churn through our system if we can't get reentry right, and we can't get these people stabilized in their community. Because we know most people will fail in the first 6 to 12 months. And that's when we really have to have our eyes on them and make sure that they get the services they need to be productive citizens. And it's great getting their vote restoration back. I think that's another piece of the puzzle in terms of become a full member of the community. But reentry is a key piece of this. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Daniel's saying, is that we got to get reentry right.
And I just want to add for reentry, I think and I'm probably going to get the agency right, but I think I'm wrong. I'm sorry. But I think it was the FBI maybe had this reentry simulator. I know that you all have gone through that simulator, and I'm talking about Daniel and Beth, and probably some of the people I recognize in the room have gone through that. And it's amazing that it's kind of presented as not really a game, but a game. And it's astounding how many people who, lawyers, doctors, whatever their walk of life, maybe educated people, with the challenges that reentry has, fail at that simulator. And if you think about those people that go through that simulator, they get to go home after that exercise. But it is reality for the thousands of people that are coming out of our criminal justice system every year. And so I agree that you have to prioritize reentry. So yes, Daniel, the dollars are there, but if it's not prioritized, it doesn't matter. And so we absolutely need to make sure that reentry is, and those dollars are prioritized.
Mhm.
We do have a question from one of the attendees, and I'll read it to you, and I'll ask Mr. Zeno to go first on this one. The attendee would like to hear you address the issue of criminalization of mental illness and its relationship to recidivism. And the overall question is, what should we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this relates to what I was talking about earlier. I mean, I think right now, the response to many things in society, including mental health related issues, is to call the police. Part of that is because the state of Iowa does not have a very good mental health system, either for adults or for children. And so there are often times where families, where community members say, there's something going wrong and somebody needs to help this person. I don't know who else to call other than the police. And they call the police, and then the police show up and they say, I'm not a mental health therapist. I don't, like, the tools that I have are to arrest you, to detain you, to bring you to the county jail, right? And so I think that on the front end, we have to do the work of, funding a mental health system. I know lots of people have heard the phrase defund the police, and that means lots of different things to lots of different people, right? But I think this is one area where the amount of money that goes to law enforcement, to correction, there's some part of that money that right now is being used for mental health. I think if you talk to most county sheriffs, the amount of mental health services, things that they do in the county jail is huge, right? And so I think figuring out how do we come up with a different system, and then Dr. Skinner talked about it, for the people who are in the correctional system. How do we provide treatment, right? If we know you have a mental illness, how do we provide you treatment and also make sure that there's services available when you're out?
Dr. Skinner, criminalization of mental illness tied to recidivism. What are some thoughts as to what should be done?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to put on I have my director's hat on, and I'm going to put my researcher hat on too. So that the research one's a little bit sideways. So
okay.
I'm going to kind of combine the two together. But what we know through the research is that arrest is rarely a direct product of mental illness. Mental illness really is a modest risk for crime and recidivism. There's usually other leading factors such as a criminal history, substance abuse issues, antisocial values and beliefs, antisocial peers that are shared with those with or without a mental illness. So we know with individuals with mental illness, they have various pathways into the criminal justice system. Kind of like Daniel said, a family member doesn't know what to do with this individual. They might be a harm to themselves or others. They call the police and things like that. But in terms of that connection, there's really, from what the literature is telling us, there is not really saying that there's a real direct relationship. But some people that do have, they're incarcerated, they have mental illness, also have some other type of reason that got them there, which might be, it could be substance abuse, could be impulse control, could be antisocial personality type things like that. So that's kind of how I see it. We have a lot of people in our system that have mental health issues that need to be treated. I also think another thing to think about too with this too is there is a place for diversion for these individuals that do not create a public safety risk, that don't have to be incarcerated, that could be living in their community safely with some type of diversion program.
Ms. Andrews, weigh in if you would on this topic of mental illness and the system.
I think Daniel and Dr. Skinner did a great job, and I'd certainly like to know more about Dr. Skinner's research because it's interesting to me. It's that's new to me. But I also think that there is an issue in terms of trauma in dealing with even going through the system. And so addressing I heard earlier when Dr. Skinner was talking about treatment and how we address people coming out of the system. That's another area that we need to look at and address.
Again, a reminder, if you are watching this, you can type a question in the Whova app in the chat function, and it will get relayed to us in our remaining, we have less than a quarter hour on this topic. Have we denoted, and I think Mr. Zeno brought it up first with regard to people coming out of the system partially because of COVID and this sort of thing. So I'll start with Dr. Skinner. I mean, the impact of COVID is not going away anytime soon. So how does that play a role with regard to the literal management of the system of corrections?
So, we have, since early March, we have been planning for COVID. We have developed a master action plan. We updated our pandemic policy. We've done tabletop exercises. We've consulted with the medical experts, public health. Now, you have to remember in Iowa, we have a releasing authority, which is called the Board of Parole. And they ultimately make the decision for release, who's going to be released. We, as a correctional facility, our 9 prisons, give release plans up to the Board of Parole and release recommendations if people finish treatment, what their behavior is like, and things like that. So when COVID hit, we had to be very, very strategic. We knew that it was going to happen. It wasn't a if, it was a when it was going to happen. And that it was a matter of containing, the virus once it got into our prisons, and also keeping our staff and individuals incarcerated healthy. So we had to create space. So we were 22% over capacity in March when COVID hit. We knew that we had to move people out somehow so we could have a safe space to start, isolating people in quarantine once it came in, because we knew it was going to come in. So one thing we did is we halted admissions for about a month, mid-April to mid-May, and then allowed people to just, release out of the prison. And then we halted it again in August to create more room. We also worked with the Board of Parole in terms of giving them people that were ready for release. They had good release plans, stable housing, had completed treatment, didn't have any kind of behavioral issues, as a list of people to look through too to help reduce the population. So as we move forward through COVID, which is, it's going to be around for a while, we will continue to get people best prepared as they can, because we want to make sure that we run these people up to the Board of Parole with the best type of release plan and housing and a more seamless transition, so there's no public safety concerns. And so the board can say yes to them, so we can continue to create more space in our prisons. So we watch our population. We have meetings every day on a daily basis. So we have to balance the front end and we have to balance the back end. We also have to make sure we're getting the treatment for those individuals too, so they're ready to get out.
And I recall seeing the story, and I think it was a story by Aaron Jordan in the Gazette that talked about the prison population year to year. And the one thing that struck me, and so I'll simply ask you because I don't get a chance to talk to the Director of Corrections often, how did we get to a position where we were X% above quote unquote capacity? Because again, in my little mind, capacity is capacity. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what am I missing as just a member of the general public on that.
It's just, it's been slowly going up for years. This is not something that just happened overnight. It's been a steady increase over time. And that could be due to a few things. Sentencing, the court system. Another thing is Board of Parole and their release decisions in terms of the number of approvals or denials. It also, we also have to think about revocations. So people that are released back in the community on parole that come back. Half of our recidivism rate, which is return to prison after 3 years, once you've been released, is for those revocations. So that also can contribute to the population. So over time, it's been, it's not been one single factor. It's just been a multitude of factors. Again, legislation, court practices, revocations, board of parole practices, availability of treatment, all these things impact the prison population. So we've seen a very steady increase over the years. It was definitely not something that's happened overnight. When COVID hit, we really had to get strategic and get very creative because we knew we were going to have it in the prisons. We knew that we didn't want to lose anyone's lives or get anyone too sick and protect our staff and those incarcerated.
So, hey, Jeff, can I just offer a quick pivot? Since
I was going to you next,
and I wanted to make
sure
that I had the opportunity to call out a few other things that we're interested in working on. And I know we talked about the focus committee, but one of the things that we are busy doing right now on that committee is drafting recommendations for unbiased policing / anti-racial profiling. And that is a huge piece. The city of Des Moines just passed an anti-racial profiling ordinance. The NAACP worked with University Heights to be the first anti-racial profiling ordinance in the state to pass. And I think these are issues that as we look at people on this line that we definitely need to address. So how do we get so disparate? It starts at when that first stop with the police. The other thing I thought that we should make sure that we mentioned were concerns with bail and pretrial release. And, it's a factor of economics. So when we talk about what's happening within our system, part of that is the economic disparities. And I'll just say African-Americans have 1/10 the wealth of whites. So that prevents attorneys. So if you're in a situation where a person with the wherewithal to get an attorney or post their bail, they can get out of prison and they can get out of jail. And then they can make some efforts between the time that they are arrested to the time they go to court to kind of rehabilitate themselves in terms of going to drug treatment and addressing some of the issues that were the original arresting factors, which looks different to the judges when it comes to the judgments. And then also, just because I'm African-American and address a number of issues, the myth behind hate crimes. So those are a few of the issues that, and when I say the myth behind hate crimes, a lot of times people think hate crimes have an enhanced sentencing, and often they don't. So there's a lot of myth behind that. And those are some of the issues that we will be addressing at the Iowa Summit on Justice and Disparities. But I did want to take a moment and just kind of jump in and put a few more things out there for people to think about.
It's as if you saw my notes where I said, what other things have we not discussed? But before I leave that, what's the website for that event that is virtual in 2 weeks?
It's iowajusticesummit.org. iowajusticesummit.org. Our governor will be there. We know Dr. Skinner and a number of other advocates, law enforcement, those employed within the criminal justice system, those directors that Beth was talking about, they will be there. So it's an opportunity to engage around this subject. If you're really serious about criminal justice reform, and that's whether it's just disparities or not, this is ground zero for that conversation and provide and to get that education. So thank you.
Mr. Zeno, what did we not discuss in our remaining couple of minutes that you'd like to either summarize on or new things to put on the table for people to ponder?
Well, I want to point out the question you asked, Jeff, how did we get to about 20% overcapacity, and Director Skinner's response, that's mass incarceration. Okay. Literally, that's it, right? The how did we get to Iowa prisons are 20% overpopulation or overcapacity in March. And then I think that the hopeful thing is in the span of a couple of months, as of today, Iowa prisons are about 6.5% overpopulation. And
hey, Daniel, you're doing my job now.
Right? And the world didn't fall apart, right? It is possible to have a smaller prison population and still have safety, right? I think a few additional items. I mean, I think people should feel empowered to figure out who your county attorney is. That person is the person in your county who's making charging decisions, Who is your county sheriff? That's the person that runs the county jail, right? Who is your state representative, your state senator, who make the laws about this should be a crime and this should, right? And so I think figuring out, I can see this being overwhelming, right? And so just figuring out, you know what? My county attorney, my county sheriff, my state rep, my state senator, those are 4 people I can talk to who have a direct impact on this system.
It all does come down to what can I feasibly do? You've got this big issue, but what can I do to take care of this corner of it? What part of your job, Dr. Skinner, did Mr. Zeno not address that you'd like to in our remaining 2 minutes or thereabouts?
He knows my stats very well. I have them right in front of me. So I think it's important for folks to know that, we have 3 core priorities that we're working towards right now in terms of our strategic priorities for the next 5 years. And that's the safe and secure operations of our prisons. Because if we don't have that in our community-based corrections, we can't do good treatment and we can't do reentry right. So I just wanted to mention, those are our 3 core priorities we're working towards, and that we are committed to as one of our focus areas, racial disparities and racial disparity and diversity. And that we want to, at the Iowa Department of Corrections, be part of the solution. We want to continue to engage in these discussions. I'm very thankful to be here with you today, Jeff and Betty and Daniel. I think this has been a very productive conversation. I also want to thank the governor and lieutenant governor for their support at the highest level of our state that are getting behind criminal justice reform and racial disparities. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm very hopeful and excited to be working with all these different individuals, and I hope to keep pushing corrections in the right direction and reducing those disparities and creating equities. So thank you all for the opportunity today.
We had, by my count, something like 6 people or more who dipped in and out of the session. So the only way that this past hour will have been a failure is if we stop talking about it once we click out of the meeting. So thanks to all of you for participating in the panel and for everyone who was watching part of the session or who may be watching it on a delayed basis on the recording. Thank you so much.
Thank you.